I matched with her on a Thursday evening. Her name was Lila, and her profile painted her as adventurous and fun, the type who wouldn't shy away from a spontaneous trip or a bold conversation. She had this picture of herself rock climbing, and another with a group of friends, laughing around a campfire. There was something magnetic about her. Our conversation started easily, flowing from one topic to another like we'd known each other for years. By Friday, we'd set a date for Saturday night. She suggested a bar downtown. It was one I'd heard of but never visited. Trendy, upscale, the type of place that served cocktails in mason jars with herbs sticking out. I arrived 10 minutes early, nervous but excited. The bar was dimly lit, music humming low in the background, a mix of chatter and laughter filling the space. I spotted her immediately. She was wearing a green dress that hugged her figure, her hair loosely pinned back. She smiled when she saw me, and for a moment, I thought this might actually be the start of something special. We ordered drinks, something with gin and rosemary that she insisted I try. The conversation started light: work, hobbies, favorite movies. She worked in marketing for a local tech company and had a penchant for indie films. I told her about my job in software development and my love for hiking. She laughed at my bad jokes, leaning in slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. Felt natural, easy. But as the night wore on, the mood shifted. She started asking personal questions, ones that felt invasive. How much did I make? Did I own or rent my apartment? At first, I laughed it off, answering vaguely, but her persistence made me uneasy. She noticed my discomfort and changed the subject, apologizing with a laugh, saying she was just curious. We ordered another round of drinks, and I decided to chalk it up to first date jitters. Maybe she was nervous too. But then she began talking about her ex. It wasn't just a passing mention. It was a detailed account of their relationship, why it ended, and how she suspected he was still watching her. She spoke with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, her fingers gripping her glass tightly. She even pointed out a man across the bar, claiming he looked like her ex, though she quickly laughed it off, saying it was probably just her imagination. After an hour or so, she suggested we move to another bar. I hesitated, but she insisted, saying this place was too crowded and she knew somewhere quieter. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked a few blocks to a smaller, darker bar. This one had a completely different vibe. It was nearly empty, with a jukebox playing soft blues in the corner. She seemed more relaxed here, ordering another round and settling into a booth. As the night went on, her stories became stranger. She told me about her family, how they'd disowned her after she dropped out of college. Then she shifted to her current living situation. She claimed she was in between apartments, crashing with a friend but looking for something permanent. She joked about moving in with me, her eyes watching my reaction closely. I laughed nervously, unsure if she was serious. By midnight, I was ready to call it a night. She'd had a few too many drinks, her words slurring slightly, her demeanor oscillating between charming and erratic. I offered to call her a cab, but she insisted she was fine. She asked if I'd walk her home, saying it wasn't far. Reluctantly, I agreed, feeling uneasy but not wanting to seem rude. Her home turned out to be a dingy apartment building on the edge of downtown. The exterior was run down, the kind of place where the streetlights flicker and the sidewalks are littered with broken glass. She led me inside, the smell of stale smoke and mildew hitting me instantly. She paused at the door, rummaging through her purse for her keys, then stopped abruptly, her expression darkening. "They're not here," she muttered, more to herself than to me. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "I think I left them inside." Before I could respond, she pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. The apartment was dark, the air thick with an unidentifiable stench. She stumbled inside, gesturing for me to follow. I hesitated but stepped in, the floor creaking under my weight. The place was a mess. Clothes piled on the floor, dishes stacked in the sink, a couch that looked like it had seen better days. She collapsed onto it, kicking off her shoes and sighing deeply. "Sorry about the mess," she said, her voice tired. "It's been a rough few weeks." I stood awkwardly near the door, debating how to extricate myself from the situation. She patted the spot next to her, but I stayed where I was, mumbling something about needing to get up early. She didn't seem to hear me, her head lolling back against the couch. I took a step toward the door, but then she spoke again, her voice sharp and clear. "Did you hear that?" I froze, my heart racing. "Hear what?" She sat up, her eyes scanning the room. "Someone's here." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I think you're imagining things," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But she shook her head, standing unsteadily and moving toward the hallway. "Stay here," she whispered, disappearing into the shadows. I wanted to leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Minutes passed, the silence stretching thin. Then I heard her scream. It wasn't a loud, piercing scream, but a guttural, panicked sound that made my blood run cold. I rushed toward the hallway, calling her name, but there was no response. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb at the far end. I found her in the bathroom, sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She was shaking, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't say anything, just pointed to the mirror. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there, just our reflections distorted by the cracked glass. "We need to leave," I said firmly, pulling her to her feet. She didn't resist, clinging to my arm as I led her back to the living room. I grabbed her purse and guided her out the door, my mind racing. I didn't know what had happened, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Outside, the air was cold and crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the apartment. She seemed calmer now, her grip on my arm loosening. She mumbled an apology, something about too much to drink and bad memories. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I flagged down a cab, helping her inside and giving the driver her address. She looked at me, her eyes glassy but grateful. "Thanks," she said softly, "for everything." I watched the cab drive away, a sense of relief washing over me. I walked home that night, replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. I never heard from her again, and I never reached out. The memory of that night lingers, a cautionary tale of how little we truly know about the people we meet. I matched with him on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. His name was Darren, and his profile gave off a confident, adventurous vibe. There was a photo of him hiking a scenic mountain trail and another of him in a sharply tailored suit at a wedding. His bio was witty, filled with light sarcasm and a hint of charm. He messaged me first, something casual but engaging, and we quickly fell into a rhythm of chatting. By the end of the day, we'd set a date for Saturday evening. He suggested a dinner spot in the city, a trendy, upscale bistro that I'd never been to but had heard glowing reviews about. Darren insisted on making the reservation, joking that he wanted to handle everything so I could just sit back and enjoy. His confidence was appealing, and I found myself looking forward to the evening. Saturday came, and I arrived a little early, taking in the ambience of the restaurant. It was stylish, with dim lighting, sleek wooden tables, and a soft hum of conversation filling the space. Darren arrived right on time, dressed impeccably in a crisp shirt and blazer. He greeted me with a warm smile, and we settled into our table. The evening began pleasantly. Darren was as charming in person as he had been over text. We talked about work. He was in finance with a focus on investment portfolios and hobbies. He had a dry sense of humor that kept me laughing, and the conversation flowed easily. The waiter came by with our drinks, and Darren raised his glass for a toast. His eyes locking onto mine as he said, "Here's to new beginnings." It felt like something out of a rom-com, and for a moment, I thought I might be in for one of those rare perfect dates. But as the evening wore on, cracks began to show. Darren was confident, too confident. His stories about his work and life were impressive, almost to the point of being unbelievable. He claimed to have closed multi-million-dollar deals single-handedly, traveled to over 30 countries, and even mentioned a brief stint as a semi-professional athlete. It was impressive, but there was a hint of arrogance in the way he spoke, as if he expected me to be in awe of him. Things took a darker turn during the main course. He began asking me questions, probing deeper into my life. At first, they were innocuous, where I grew up, my favorite vacation spot. But then they became more personal. He asked about my family, pressing for details about my relationships with them. When I mentioned my younger brother, his expression shifted, a strange intensity in his eyes. "Do you get along?" he asked, leaning in slightly. "Yes, we're close," I replied, feeling a little uneasy at his sudden focus. "That's good," he said, his tone flat. "Family's important." From there, the conversation took an odd turn. Darren began sharing his own family stories, but they were unsettling. He spoke about his father's strict discipline and how he'd learned to stand up for himself at a young age. There was an undercurrent of anger in his voice, though he tried to mask it with humor. He even mentioned an estranged older brother, saying they'd had a falling out years ago over something stupid, but refused to elaborate when I asked. By dessert, I was ready for the evening to end. Darren's charm had worn thin, replaced by a domineering presence that made me uncomfortable. I politely declined his offer of a nightcap, citing an early morning commitment. He seemed disappointed but didn't press further, walking me to my car and bidding me a cordial good night. I drove home feeling uneasy but relieved the date was over. The next day, I decided not to pursue things further. I didn't block his number, but I didn't respond to his follow-up text either. I figured he'd take the hint and move on. That Monday, I noticed something strange. On my way to work, a black SUV seemed to be following me. At first, I dismissed it as a coincidence, but as I changed lanes and made turns, the SUV stayed close. It wasn't until I pulled into my office parking lot that it drove off. I told myself I was being paranoid, shaken from the odd date with Darren, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The following week, I started noticing small things out of place. A package I hadn't ordered arrived at my doorstep. A book about mindfulness and self-improvement. It was addressed to me with no sender information. My social media accounts, which were private, had new follow requests from accounts with no profile pictures and strange usernames. And one night, I thought I saw a shadow outside my bedroom window, but when I looked closer, nothing was there. I couldn't shake the feeling that Darren was behind it. He had mentioned during our date that he was good at finding things out and had joked about being a master of research. At the time, I'd laughed it off, but now it seemed less funny. One evening, I came home to find my front door unlocked. I was certain I'd locked it before leaving that morning. My heart raced as I stepped inside, every creak of the floorboards making me jump. Nothing seemed to be missing, but there was a lingering sense that someone had been there. I called a locksmith that night and had the locks changed, but the unease remained. A few days later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of me, taken at a coffee shop I frequented. The message beneath it read, "You look beautiful when you're focused." My blood ran cold. I reported the number to the police and filed a restraining order against Darren, though I had no concrete proof it was him. For weeks, the harassment continued. Anonymous texts, packages, and glimpses of the black SUV near my apartment. I stopped going out alone, always looking over my shoulder. Friends stayed with me, and I even considered moving, but the thought of uprooting my life because of someone else's obsession made me angry. Eventually, the texts stopped, and the packages ceased arriving. The black SUV no longer appeared in my rearview mirror. Slowly, life began to return to normal, though the fear lingered, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. Months later, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Darren had moved out of the city. He'd gotten a new job and was apparently thriving. I never confronted him, never got the closure I wanted. To this day, I don't know why he targeted me or what he hoped to achieve. But the memory of that date, of his intense eyes and unsettling stories, stays with me as a reminder to trust my instincts and be cautious with the people I let into my life. I matched with her on a warm summer evening, one of those nights when the city seemed alive with possibility. Her name was Vanessa, and her profile was striking. Her photos were effortlessly glamorous, and her bio had an air of mystery. It read, "Life's too short for ordinary moments." She reached out first with a clever opening line that referenced one of my hobbies, and we quickly began chatting. Her messages were witty and engaging, filled with just the right mix of flirtation and depth. By the end of the night, we had a date set for the following Friday. Vanessa suggested we meet at an art gallery downtown that was hosting a late-night exhibit. I loved the idea. It was different from the typical dinner or drinks date. She mentioned she was a regular at the gallery and promised to give me a tour of the exhibit, which featured contemporary works focused on human emotions. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself looking forward to the evening. When Friday arrived, I dressed with care, choosing a casual yet polished outfit. The gallery was in a sleek, modern building, its glass facade glowing softly in the evening light. Inside, the space was minimalistic, with high ceilings and white walls that allowed the artwork to take center stage. I spotted Vanessa almost immediately. She was dressed in a flowing black dress, her hair styled in loose waves. She looked even more stunning in person, her presence commanding yet approachable. She greeted me with a warm smile and a quick hug, then led me into the gallery. As we walked, she spoke with passion about the pieces, describing the artist's techniques and the emotions they sought to evoke. Her knowledge was impressive, and her enthusiasm made the experience feel almost magical. I found myself drawn to her energy, the way she moved through the space with confidence and ease. After we'd explored the exhibit, Vanessa suggested we grab a drink at the gallery's rooftop bar. The view was breathtaking, the city skyline twinkling against the dark sky. We found a cozy corner and ordered cocktails. The conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from art to travel to our favorite books. She shared stories about her work as a freelance photographer, describing her love for capturing raw, unfiltered moments. There was something captivating about the way she spoke, as if every word was carefully chosen to reveal just enough without giving too much away. As the night went on, I noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. Vanessa, who had been warm and engaging, began to steer the conversation in a more probing direction. She asked deeply personal questions about my childhood, my relationships, and my fears. Her intensity was disarming, but I chalked it up to her being genuinely curious. It was rare to meet someone so openly interested in the nuances of another person's life. But then she began sharing stories of her own, stories that were unsettling in their candor. She spoke about an ex-boyfriend who had betrayed her trust, her voice calm but her words laced with bitterness. She described in detail how she'd confronted him, how she'd exposed his lies to their mutual friends. Her eyes glinted with a strange satisfaction as she recounted the fallout. At one point, she leaned in closer, her gaze locking onto mine. "Do you believe in karma?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She smiled, a faint, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. After a while, I suggested we call it a night. Vanessa seemed disappointed but agreed. She hugged me tightly before we parted ways, her fingers lingering on my arm as she said goodbye. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her charm and charisma had a darker edge, one that left me unsettled. Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize my unease. Vanessa texted me, her messages as witty and engaging as ever, but I found myself hesitating to reply. I couldn't pinpoint why, but something about her intensity lingered in my mind. Then, strange things started happening. My phone began receiving anonymous calls at odd hours, the caller hanging up as soon as I answered. One morning, I stepped outside to find my car's tires slashed. I reported it to the police, but there were no leads. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me taken at the gallery, a candid shot of me standing alone, staring at one of the pieces. The sight of it made my stomach drop. I confronted Vanessa through text, asking if she knew anything about the photograph. She denied it, claiming she had no idea what I was talking about. But her denial felt insincere, her words carefully chosen in a way that only deepened my suspicions. The incidents escalated. My social media accounts were hacked, posts appearing that I hadn't written. Friends began receiving strange messages from someone impersonating me. I started to feel like I was being watched, every movement scrutinized. One night, as I returned home, I noticed a shadowy figure standing at the edge of my driveway. When I called out, the figure disappeared into the darkness. I reached out to the police again, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. I began changing my routines, avoiding places I frequented, and keeping my blinds closed at all times. Friends offered their support, but I felt increasingly isolated, trapped in a cycle of fear and paranoia. Then, one evening, Vanessa showed up at my door. I hadn't given her my address, but there she was, standing on my porch with a calm, almost serene expression. She held a small package in her hands and insisted she just wanted to talk. I didn't let her inside, keeping the door firmly closed as I told her to leave. Her demeanor shifted, the calm facade cracking to reveal anger. She accused me of leading her on, of playing games. Her words were sharp, each one cutting deeper. Eventually, she left, but the encounter left me shaken. I decided then and there to leave behind the city and the memories of that night. It took weeks to pack up my life, to find a new place far enough away to feel safe. Even after I moved, I remained cautious, always looking over my shoulder. I never heard from Vanessa again, but her presence lingers in my mind. The way she could shift from charming to menacing, the intensity of her gaze, the subtle threats woven into her words. It's a reminder of how easily appearances can deceive, of how danger can hide behind even the most beautiful facade.